Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. Welcome to the 2025 UNC Business of Healthcare Conference. My name is Zoe Kernodle. I'm the director of the UNC Center for the Business of Health here at UNC Kenan-Flagler. Thank you for being here. I know many of you are very busy, and so we're grateful that you chose to spend your time here with us today. Before we get started, a couple of notes. First, I want to thank a couple of folks. So for starters, Aaron Leach, Suzanne Killian, and Josh Barrett on my team, who work super hard across the year to create excellent content and events like this one. We wouldn't be here without them, so really appreciate their hard work. Also, the leadership at Kenan-Flagler, the Kenan Institute for Private Enterprise, who continue to support us, our partners across campus, including Gillings, Eshelman, the School of Medicine, the School of Nursing, and many, many others. Our sponsors who support this great event and some of our work across the year, the MBA Healthcare Club students and our undergraduate minors who are volunteering their time today to get us where we need to go, and of course, all of our great speakers and panelists who are joining us today. This is my 8th year leading the topic development for this conference and for our overall annual research agenda, and I think so far this topic, navigating healthcare ecosystem disruptions, might be one of my favorite. When we talk about the healthcare ecosystem, we're not referring to a neat or tidy system with predictable parts and outputs. Instead, we're talking about a vast and living network, clinicians, patients, payers, investors, policymakers, pharmaceutical partners, researchers, government agencies, and digital innovators, all connected and all interdependent. Like any ecosystem, every part shapes the whole, and a change in one area sends ripples across the rest. And this complexity inevitably means that disruptions, whether technological, regulatory, or social, don't only impact isolated parts. Today, as we navigate these disruptions, it's crucial to understand healthcare as an ecosystem in its truest sense, dynamic, adaptive, and deeply interconnected. So my hope is that the conversations we have today will help us think through how we can respond and evolve together. And so to kick us off, we have a fantastic morning keynote panel. Moderating this discussion is our friend Jimmy Rosen. Jimmy serves as the CEO and member of the board of directors for READDI, which is short for Rapidly Emerging Antiviral Drug Development Initiative. Got it? Which is a nonprofit biotechnology company whose mission is to ensure that broad-spectrum, small molecule antiviral drugs are ready for immediate use at the first signs of future pandemics. Jimmy is also an alumnus of UNC Kenan-Flagler and the UNC Gillings School of Global Public Health, so we're grateful to have him kick us off and introduce our panelists.
Thanks, Zoe. Thanks, everybody. Having flashbacks to spending a whole lot of time in Corey Auditorium right now. So first of all, thank you. Thanks, Zoe. Thanks, Aaron. Thank you, Josh, for getting us well prepared. I always want to thank the student volunteers who are behind all of this. We know how hard you work and really appreciate the effort. This navigating disruptions topic for today really is timely. I mean, it seems like every day we're getting shaken by something. And one thing that we learn in business school is that people can handle good news, they can handle bad news, but what they can't handle is uncertainty. Uncertainty shakes businesses, disrupts economies, and you know, if you have a chance to take a class here as a student on navigating uncertainty and strategy on uncertainty, yeah, definitely do it. I think one of the best classes I ever took here actually was by Rich Bettis, who we lost this year, a really fantastic professor and a great person. But it was one of the most valuable classes I took and prepares us well for today's topic. You know, my prepared comments here are going to be very brief because we want to get to our panelists, but you know, the U.S. has long been a global leader in healthcare research and innovation, and as federal funding priorities and workforce dynamics evolve and international competition intensifies, how are organizations adapting to sustain this leadership? And we're going to discuss how these changes impact the innovation pipeline, the opportunities and challenges they present, and strategies to maintain U.S. competitiveness in a changing global landscape. And fortunately, our panelists here, Jeanne Hecht, CEO of Lexitas, Steve Farmer of ABIG Health, and Andrew Barnhill of IQVIA, have expertise that runs across all of these areas. We're going to spare reading everybody's bio, and we'll let you do that yourselves. It's in the program, and you can also look them up on LinkedIn or their company websites. Suffice to say, there are lots of experience up here over the years. So the areas of government strategy and policy, regulatory affairs, discovery and development research, product development and commercialization, integration of new technologies, payment systems and processes, patient advocacy and equitable access to care, and a whole lot more. So one of the things we're going to start with is let's just be a little bit provocative and controversial right out of the gate, which is let's address the underlying assumption that leadership and innovation is a desirable goal. I mean, is this actually where we want to be in the U.S. and if so, why? And if not, why? And what are the consequences of that? So let's start, Jeanne, with you. You're a global executive and a company builder. Why is sustaining U.S. innovation leadership generally important and important in your business?
I think all people in here can agree that with innovation comes change, and with change comes opportunity. And as a global ecosystem, if we're not evolving and we're not changing, we're falling behind. So when I think about the United States and its position as a global economic trade leader, as a global innovator in research and life sciences, it's important that we're doing that not with stale technologies or with stale ideas. And I also think that employees and A-plus talent and players want to work in a dynamic and changing environment where there's innovation and learnings and they can solve really interesting problems together. And if we're not working with that in mind, and instead we're stuck 10 or 15 years behind the leaders, we'll start to see a brain drain. And that's what keeps me up at night, is the concern that the United States could potentially fall behind instead of leading from the front.
That's a great way to kick this off. Andrew, in your current interactions with the U.S. government and U.S. government officials in your capacity at IQVIA, do they see leadership and innovation as a priority? And if so, what are the main concerns, opportunities, and risks that have to be addressed for the U.S. to sustain its position?
I think they do, and I think most government officials do, and at least they see it from the perspective of a competition between countries. And if that competition or competitive spirit motivates policies that are productive to furthering an innovation ecosystem, then that's something we are certainly on board with. I think global companies such as IQVIA are in an interesting spot because we have, yes, a commitment to the United States, but also a global commitment to furthering science and innovation anywhere, and we have to continuously balance that. But as a company that was built and founded just a few miles down the road from here, I think at root, we want to find ways that we can partner with government officials, even if we see disagreements in a range of policies, to help shine that light on the importance of keeping a strong ecosystem at home.
So from IQVIA's perspective and from a broader perspective, are you better off, given the uncertainty, are you better off trying to support U.S. innovation and trying to support U.S. leadership, or are you better off spreading your bets?
Well, we obviously have a commitment to innovation wherever it comes, but I think at root, based on our founding commitments to the country where we were given the resources to grow and thrive, we obviously have a commitment here. And also, I think there is nothing like the ecosystem that's been developed over time in the United States to support innovation. Yes, great ideas come from countries all over the world. There are no geographic limits to creativity. However, I think there's a certain mix of academic ingenuity, resource development from the private sector, and public-private collaboration here in the United States that you're not going to find other places. And so if we don't, as a large global company, sort of further that commitment in the United States, I think we're going to lose that particular location where the best ideas can really thrive and grow.
I just want to add like two little comments about that. The first is the access to capital here in the United States for many developing and emerging biotech companies, and I'm in the ophthalmology space. It's still the largest access to capital or source for capital for new innovation is coming out of the United States in my field. The other aspect behind that is still it's also, and especially again in ophthalmology, it's the largest market with the highest reimbursement and the greatest opportunity to create wealth for organizations and returns on investment for investors. So as a result, if we want to continue to be a leading economy, we need to have that continued investment in economic development and innovation here.
It's a really important point and something that we're going to dive into a little bit deeper later on in this conversation. Steve, given your experience as Chief Strategy Officer for CMS and liaison to FDA, what's your perspective on this topic, and what sort of vulnerabilities does it present and really make more apparent that are in the U.S. system now that are getting a lot of attention, and this uncertainty in the economy and where the U.S. is going with its leadership in healthcare? What's been exposed that some of the things that maybe you knew about when you were in a high-ranking position in the U.S. government, and now more people are becoming aware of?
That's a complicated question with lots of. Okay, it is working. There's a complicated question with lots of different elements. I think sustaining U.S. innovation is absolutely crucial. This is a huge part of our economy. It would be a tremendous loss to U.S. interests to not sustain that. That said, I feel that the costs of innovation can be borne more equitably, and I think our turbulent political climate in the current time is very much a reflection of a lack of affordability for most Americans of healthcare, of a variety of different things. And the unfettered expectation of incremental gains with substantial cost increases is not sustainable in the long run. We need to focus more on accessibility, affordability, and more equitable access.
Can you dive into that a little bit more, though? Because those are great buzzwords, but what are the implications for, like, how does the government make that happen? What are the implications for business when you say you need to make things more affordable and accessible? Because when businesses hear affordable and accessible, they might take a virtuous approach and say, well, of course we want our stuff to be more affordable and accessible, but that also means reduced margins. So how do we balance those things?
It may mean reduced margins, but it also may mean that you're making better investments in products which truly are breakthrough. It's notable at the FDA in the device space, which is more my area of expertise. They designated more than 1,000 breakthrough devices in the last 10 years, which is vastly in excess of what we've actually seen in terms of truly breakthrough in the way that most people think about it. For patients. There are technologies which can substantially improve outcomes, and if you substantially improve outcomes, you can have attendant reductions in costs that allow us to make healthcare more accessible.
I'll also add to that I think the private sector does come up with ideas that will promote affordability, but sometimes what we have to do is figure out a way to connect with maybe it's CMS, maybe it's others in the administration to say, all right, here is something that the manufacturers could do. Here is something that the payers could do. Let's try this out. And so having a government and political appointees that are willing to give industry the opportunity to try out new things that will promote affordability, I think is the type of environment that industry likes to see in a government partner.
Can you give some examples of that, Andrew?
Yeah. So, IQVIA, of course, is on the sort of early stage of clinical development, but also on the commercialization stage, where we are a partner to a range of pharmaceutical manufacturers and helping them launch their products in markets all around the world. So as part of that, one of the things that we do when we are developing policy ideas is think about, okay, how can we work with manufacturers on the commercialization side to promote ideas that will incentivize access. One of those recently has been rebate reform for prescription drugs. We have worked extensively with both administrations, the Biden administration and now the Trump administration, CMS, to try to get some of those ideas to actually see the light. Some have been successful, some have not, but that's an example of industry working with government agencies to try to find a lane for accessibility.
Yeah, it's a great point. What other, and this is for any of the panelists, what other specific examples have you either seen implemented, are hearing about being discussed, or things that are not being discussed that really ought to be? Things like eliminating PBMs, big stuff like that. I mean, are there examples of those things that maybe we could discuss?
Well, I mean, one other that I will add, there has been a movement for direct purchase of prescription drugs right now that actually came in from an industry idea that then was picked up by the current administration. Now it's being branded by the White House. You saw the announcement about Trump RX, but this actually started with ideas coming out of pharma to say, okay, how can we find our patients a lane to access therapies without having to go through PBMs? That's an example of something that's a big idea that could, perhaps, I mean, the devil is in the details of whether or not this will work, but it's an idea that came out of industry.
Yeah, fascinating. So, Andrew, sticking with you, you brought up the global perspective and IQVIA's global footprint. If we're talking about U.S. leadership and innovation, and we're still sticking to this question of how important is it and do we want it, what's the alternative? So if the U.S. isn't the leader, then who?
Yeah, I think that's the challenge. Obviously, there are examples of clinical leadership around the globe. There is less innovation per capita development all the way through the pipeline of commercialization anywhere else in the world than you see in the U.S. So I do think in many cases, if the U.S. cedes this position, there is a vacuum. That's not to say there aren't good ideas. That's not to say there aren't great developers elsewhere, but there is not the same combination. We have seen recently outgrowth of development partnerships in China. We recently had a couple of our executives there taking a look at some new launches of new bioparks, but it is just not the same combination of free market, capital, public-private, and university partnerships that you see here in the U.S. It's certainly not the case in Europe, where the regulatory frameworks are often more challenging to industry. So I think if the U.S. steps back, the future of the life sciences is certainly more unstable.
I would double click on the China comment because in ophthalmology, I'm seeing a tremendous number of assets that are in early stage development in China. There is a desire to bring them to the United States. And that desire is obviously rooted based upon the large market size that's existed here. And so there's a number of assets that are being found and developed inside laboratories in China and are either being out-licensed to U.S. companies, outright purchased by U.S. companies, spun into U.S. biotechs, or being developed by the Chinese biotech company in the United States with U.S. partners. We've got a very interesting compound that we're working on and have been representing for a company in China in the U.S. FDA, specifically in hopes to eliminate or prevent or reduce the number of cataract surgeries, for example. And I have not seen that level of innovation in the United States around that particular disease state. Most of the innovation is around accelerating surgeon times and reducing time for patients in the surgical suite. Now we're actually seeing where there's interventional agents being developed to try to reduce the size of cataracts to eliminate the potential need for surgeries for some patients where surgery isn't an option. So that came out of China, and that's coming into the U.S. And I continue to see that in gene therapy and as well as in other subspecialties within the ophthalmology space. So I feel like there is innovation coming over here. It is a shame, though, or would be a shame if we lose that same level of innovation that we've had for years within academia or within specialty incubator labs that then come in to bring the products through the U.S. Regulatory process.
You know, I'll also add that it's actually one of the few bipartisan points of agreement recently on Capitol Hill that there is a race with China on clinical development that we have to pay attention to. And I've seen, and this is coming out of course, this FDA under the Trump administration, but also Democrats in Congress on the China Select Committee who recognize the need to pay attention to, okay, where are we losing steam in the U.S. and where should we take cues from where things are going faster or more efficiently in other parts of the world.
Yeah, so in 2011, I did an Eisenhower Fellowship in China, and one of the things I saw was the development of these huge bioparks and science parks, and they were just building. I mean, they were enormous, just building after building after building of lab space. And when I was taken on the tours of these spaces, there was nobody working there, but they were fully equipped. And at one point I said, when are the workers going to start here? When will the research begin? And the person looked me straight in the eye and said, "Oh, they're already working." And I said, "But there's still plastic the wrappers are still on the furniture, and none of the equipment has been unpacked." And they're like, "No, they're on break right now, but they're working." I was like, "Okay." That was an unnecessary thing to say, but what was very clear was that they were building an enormous amount of infrastructure to get to the point where they are right now. And when industry was having the conversation about what was going on in China at that time, they were saying, well, and this is what China was saying, we're going to innovate in China, we're going to build in China for China. And so people say, well, that doesn't sound like that much of a threat, because if they're innovating in China and building in China for China, why should we worry about that? Well, that was a pretty naive perspective, because what they were doing was preparing for this moment where people like us are sitting up on a panel saying, oh, wow, China's innovating, and now they're going to start competing in markets that are important to U.S. companies. So, Steve, is that a reasonable observation? I mean, are you seeing this same kind of phenomenon with the companies that you're working with in the business that you do?
I mean, everybody is trying to come to the U.S. The U.S. is the most important market, both because of how much we pay and the business environment here. For example, in Europe, you may have to negotiate with every single individual country, which you do not have to do the same here. Yeah, I think the U.S. needs to respond to that and continue to make investments in our infrastructure and leading the world. We just really shouldn't be sitting here.
Are there any other countries or regions that we need to keep an eye on? We can't be completely obsessed with what's happening in China. They're obviously a huge and important competitor. But are there other regions or areas that the smart money is looking to, either in fostering business there or saying, just really better keep an eye on them?
So IQVIA also looks at not just where are the best ideas coming from, but who is figuring out a drug and device approval process more efficiently or more effectively. Interesting one right now is Australia has removed a lot of regulatory barriers while at the same time become effective partners with industry. And recently we were asked by FDA, what's going on at phase 1 level in Australia and how are they moving so fast? So that's a unique place that might not have initially come to mind, but we're paying attention to.
It's a great, and to bring up the regulatory point, Steve, maybe we'll come back to you on that one, which is, when we think about navigating disruption and navigating uncertainty, as innovative as we are in the United States, of course, there's other great ideas coming from other countries. What have you seen globally that maybe we ought to think more seriously about adopting, to Andrew's point?
Well, I think we can simplify our regulatory process for sure, but there is a balance between patient safety and regulation, and the burden of regulation should be proportional to risk. but also accounting for benefit. And I think in the U.S., we've lowered our regulatory burden, at least in the device space, so that if you have a low risk, that you don't really have to produce that much benefit. And that's a challenge for value. But relative to Europe, historically in the device space, it's clearly been tougher to get your device approved and navigate the markets in Europe than it is in the U.S. We may be ceding that role as well in the reductions in staff at the FDA and our ability to support particularly smaller innovators that lack as much experience and depth of bench to navigate complex systems.
Yeah, there is an irony of that when you hear a political argument made that you're trying to increase efficiency and remove red tape, but you also remove staff. You know, in some sense, it becomes more difficult because you have fewer people to help expedite a process, and so there's obviously a tug and pull to that, but it's a challenge that we note.
And further there, you've not only removed staff, but you've often left senior staff.
Right.
And those that remain are in an environment where it's very risky, and there's a fear that you're next. And so people are going to be more conservative in their acceptance of innovation or anything that isn't clearly approvable.
One of the other challenges is as an innovator and a developer of a drug or a device, you often develop a very cordial and informed working relationship with the reviewers. And so if the reviewers who've worked with you for the last 5-6 years, as you've gone through preclinical into the clinic with your drug, and those reviewers are no longer available or at the agency, it can often create changes in your drug development program because new individuals enter and have different questions, different ideas, different thoughts. And so we're, to the earlier point about change, right? It's important for kind of stabilization and acceleration and efficiency around development and approval processes to have consistency in the individuals who are also supporting you through that, supporting the community through the review process of these products.
It's a great point and a great segue into this next question. I'm going to read, this is one of the ones I prepared. So, and it goes back to Jeanne, so it's great that you brought this up. So most breakthrough products come from small and mid-sized companies that depend heavily on outsourced services like CROs and contract manufacturing. How do you see the current policy and investment climate affecting small and mid-sized companies' ability to innovate with the speed, quality, and safety necessary to outdo emerging global competitors? So this really wraps up, several of the topics we brought up so far.
So I've been in the industry for almost 30 years, and I tell everyone, and I spent several years in all different parts of the industry, including investing. And I came back into being an operator through a deal team and diligence exercise with a private equity where I was supporting. And it's never been as hard because of the access to capital, meaning that my ideal customer profile, for those of you who are in business school, is small and mid-sized companies. And years ago, access to capital took time, but didn't take as much time as it's taking now. And I would say that the freeze, as I call it, of 23 or end of 23 through 24 appears to be thawing. And there's a lot of data that shows that there's been some very interesting transactions, and those transactions have provided much needed capital to the biotech market that's here. What that's also meant is, and so just by way of an example, I started working with a company that was investing in pediatric myopia, which is a growing and progressive illness worldwide. And it took them almost 18 months to get a couple $2 million to advance their development program. And it was on the back of a strategic. And so we in the industry are really leaning to the strategics. So the Alcons, the Bausch and Lombs, the J&J Visionary Ventures, things like that. But what has also, to carry on from some of the earlier conversations, what's come through is the notion that while U.S. companies might have been having challenges with access to capital and European companies were having challenges with access to capital, there was innovation happening in the Far East, and that innovation has started to come in or came in and helped to fill some of the gaps that were here when companies here that were innovators were unable to get that access to capital.
This access to capital question, so like Jeanne, I've been in this business for over 30 years, and I think this is the toughest down cycle I've ever seen. And part of this thawing may be coming from, we see public markets get really frothy, and when public markets get really frothy and public equities valuations are high, then portfolio managers and asset managers begin to their portfolios get a little bit out of balance, and they get underweighted in alternative assets. And so it's an opportunity for them to then rotate some capital into alternative assets and take some money off the table in public equities. And then there is always the pool of cash on the sidelines. And in my humble opinion, I think one of the things that's kept things afloat is the fact that there's been a lot of cash on the sidelines over the past several years. And the hope is that for small and medium-sized companies, that that the froth in the public markets, that Jennifer Conrad used to always say in our economics class, trees don't grow to the sky. So eventually, public equities have to come back down to earth, and the hope is that some of the rotation of capital out of public equities is going to come back into small and medium-sized companies. The hard part is that it's the earliest stage venture that benefits last. So there may be still some time for it to work through the system.
Yeah,
are you seeing the same thing?
That's a really important point, because in biotech, a lot of companies that are investing capital obviously want to de-risk their investment. And so they're more looking for clinical stage data. And if you're a company that's still in the lab and is looking to go first in clinic, raising that seed or Series A is more challenging, or has been more challenging over the last several years, without kind of knocking on friends and family's doors, because the capital's been predominantly reserved for late stage assets, and that's been a challenge.
I think one thing to also keep in mind that sort of surrounded that discussion is the political environment in the U.S. and the posture towards the life sciences sector has created, I think, more uncertainty for small and mid-sized companies maybe than for some of the larger players that have had direct negotiations. If you have a more limited portfolio, if you're a one-product company, you're watching very closely to see, how that therapeutic class is being treated in drug pricing decisions, regulatory decisions. And so your ability to move and make decisions has to be more nimble, but also is a little bit more risky for you. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Absolutely. Steve, what are your thoughts on this topic with respect to the quality and safety part of this? Having had a foot in CMS and FDA, you just have such an interesting perspective on this. But if small and mid-sized companies are the innovators, and they heavily rely on outsourcing to CROs and outsourced manufacturing, do we have a worry about the potential for cutting corners, or how much can you invest in that single killer experiment or that one batch of drug that you're going to take through your clinical trial to make sure that you have enough money to get over the line?
Yeah, that is an interesting issue. There's been a lot of emphasis on supporting innovators and supporting innovation at the FDA. And there's accelerated programs both on the pharmaceutical side and also on the device side. And what you see is that the FDA will say that safety and efficacy is their remit, and they are focused on that. They're not adjusting their standards for accelerated approvals, but the reality is that they are. And their legal phrasing of it is that there's a greater acceptance for uncertainty in the risks and benefits of devices for accelerated innovations. What they don't say is that there's a much greater emphasis on post-market evidence generation for those innovations. And the challenge is that the FDA has historically not enforced those post-market evidence generation requirements, particularly for small companies who are not serial submitters. They're less accountable. They have less of a relationship with the FDA than the large incumbents, such that they're not as focused on, are there legal repercussions if they're not going to come after me? It's not going to affect my future submissions. So yeah, that's a challenge.
Again, speaking from the kind of the rare and orphan disease indication space within ophthalmology, like retinitis pigmentosa or Stargardt's or LCA5, these genetic inherited retinal diseases, the agency has actually adjusted, at least on the ophthalmology reviewer side, the need for 2 confirmatory registrational phase 3 studies. It's no longer necessary because the patient population numbers are too small. It would take an exorbitant number of time to try to identify and find and recruit and those patients and collect the kind of 5-year safety data that's required often. So as a result, they've allowed for this phase 1, phase 2 study approach to actually obtain approval for assets and then to do additional post-market safety analysis within kind of real specialty indications. So it's been nice to see them loosen the requirements purely because the patients are in need for sight-saving technologies and treatment options.
Yeah, fascinating. Let's switch topics just a little bit, or we're going to switch directions just a tiny bit. With global leadership, with vulnerabilities in global leadership in certain sectors, especially biotechnology, we have national security concerns. So, Steve, maybe you could take this one. What are the national security implications of a weakened global leadership position in healthcare innovation, and what can and should the U.S. government do to address them?
Well, I think the U.S.'s ability to respond to the COVID pandemic was pretty illustrative of the national security implications of those investments. We were able to respond faster and more effectively than many other countries to identify, produce, and mass produce COVID vaccines during a period of crisis. And we would like to I think we need to maintain that ability. And if we cede all of the innovation and development to other countries, we won't be able to respond next time. But I also want to point out another issue on national security front, which is that there has been significant damage to the reputational to the reputations of our institutions, the CDC, the FDA, CMS, and academia and companies, such that it'll be harder in the future to respond to crises or pandemics if you don't have a clear voice that you trust to guide you to navigate those scenarios.
So to Steve's point there about our institutions, health security is national security. And so if we believe that, then what's a part of health security? It's having a strong CDC that is able to do public health surveillance. It is having a research ecosystem such as NIH and other associated entities. It is making investments in individual Americans and communities on public health areas. So it's all of those things. It's the clinical side, it's the surveillance side, it's the public health metrics side. That's all a part of that health security umbrella.
What is the level of awareness among our national leaders to all the things that you just mentioned?
It varies. I mean, like any government, you're going to have some individuals that can zero in on that argument and others that cannot. I think that's part of where we come in as sort of leaders and companies in the life sciences and in public health to continuously educate. Okay, no matter where a particular government starts, a particular administration starts, they may have a great awareness of this or a very limited one. We still have a responsibility to go in and say, here is what our sector does, and here is why this matters, national security. We've been doing a lot of that lately. but it's important regardless of who's in power.
Is the message getting through?
It's a mix. I was telling somebody earlier before we started that, we have formed some great, partnerships with, members of the administration, but there's still work to be done, and, that'll continue. So.
I just wonder, and again, this might sound like a stupid thought, so apologies, it is a Friday, if we cede to other nations the ability to innovate here, is it no different than the argument right now regarding manufacturing, right? So manufacturing is done off the United States. If all innovation is done outside the United States, are we then just merely shoppers of other companies' innovation and products? And so will we, find ourselves in a similar situation further down the line?
Can we put you on the line to answer your own question?
Yeah, I think we will. I think that it's, if we seed innovation now to the degree that I feel like it's somewhat slipping through our hands, even though a lot of people, smart people in this room, outside of this room, are fighting to keep it, I think we will find ourselves in a problematic situation in years to come.
Yeah. Well, a couple of anecdotes from the company that I run now is developing small molecule broad spectrum antiviral drugs in advance of the next pandemic. So we are squarely in this space. And some of the conversations that I've had with global leaders they have shared stories about trying to negotiate access to vaccines during the COVID pandemic, and negotiating with literally the groups that were in possession of those vials of vaccine, standing on the tarmac at airports, haggling over price with various buyers. And you can imagine that the wealthier countries are the ones that got access to the vaccines. And every one of them that I've spoken to has said, we absolutely cannot be in that position again. So doing a better job preparing for the next one is not just an advertisement for the company that I'm running, but really a national imperative and a matter of healthcare and national security.
And it's important to highlight what has worked well in the past, too. I mean, Operation Warp Speed was a success. And, if we sort of remove ourselves from that and allow the negative messaging about those efforts to sort of take over in the sort of media ecosystem and in the political one, then we're losing the opportunity to share best practices and what we can be prepared for and what sorts of negotiated partnerships we should have in place for the next pandemic.
Great point. Yeah. All right, this is going to be a jump ball question about talent and labor. So anybody hop in and answer as you want to. So between now and when agentic AI rules the world, innovation will continue to rely on clever people from all points on the globe and talented workers to execute and implement their discoveries. However, the research workforce upon which we depend is under increasing pressure. What's your perspective on this issue, and how do you see it playing out?
So I recently left the federal government and considered a variety of different job options or fractional job options as part of that process. And I discovered that most universities are not hiring. They couldn't hire, even ones that had money were unable to hire people because they were completely locked down and terrified of the current environment. Both loss of NIH grants, which leaves you with faculty that are unfunded, then a reduction in indirect support for institutions, which funds your PhD students and your lab space, and then on the provider side, a loss of margin because of reducing fee-for-service payments, combined with a growing fear about a larger and larger proportion of patients who are uninsured because of cuts to Medicaid, as well as loss of subsidies in the ACA. The consequences of this are devastating. Institutions around the country who are academic are contracting, and even other community hospitals are now financially in distress as well. So that is your source of talent. That is where you develop the next generation, and I'm fearful of where this is heading.
5 o'clock yet? Because I need a drink. Disruption and uncertainty is paralyzing. I mean, that's the theme, isn't it?
I'm gonna approach it from a different angle, which is during COVID, it felt like, because of perhaps a lot of different reasons, there was a massive destabilization in the workforce, in the private sector, and turnover rates, attrition, it was just eating a lot of companies, and there were lots and lots of challenges. And that had to do a lot with kind of maybe hyper growth, employee wage inflation, you name it. And it felt like people were jumping for reasons that, as an executive leader, sometimes were hard to understand. And it ended up being, now that I've found over the last 2 years, that at least in my environment, that the workforce has stabilized. But what it hasn't necessarily done is grown at the same rate. And I couldn't agree more that a lot of the talent that I look to employ come out of universities, healthcare systems, academia, because I need people with a clinical understanding who've decided no longer to engage in a clinical environment. And if that is shrinking, then I need to be thinking about what's going to happen to my business in a couple of years as a result.
I agree completely. I tend to like to hire people who have had some government experience beforehand as well. And, I teach part-time, and I hear from many of my students that they want to work in government on the health policy side, but are having troubles sort of getting in. And so that's going to be a challenge, a few years down the road, where you watch young professionals that might not have had that early training experience find those opportunities, and then they come to us, and where do we go from there? So that's a workforce challenge that's probably different on our side of the spectrum than on the provider side, but it's something that we're acutely aware of.
Well, look, we're optimists here, and we're the sage old people on the panel, right? We've got to give the students in this room some opportunity and direction here. So one of the things that we've got to do well is, after the disruption and some of the destruction and the tearing down of certain institutions, literally and figuratively, where are the opportunities going to be? And so the retired Senator Richard Burr is on the board of directors of READDI. He's a phenomenal person and a really thoughtful advisor. We had a conversation not too long ago where we were talking about our plans at our company to approach the U.S. government in this changing environment, and the details of that plan. And what he said was, he's like, look, you've got a plan. And that's more than we're seeing from a lot of other people. Present the plan, stick with the plan, make people aware of it, because eventually we're going to come out of this cycle. And those people who have done the thinking and have put the plans on paper are certainly going to have a leg up. So Andrew, how do we do a better job of preparing for when some of the budget impasse stuff has worked its way through the system, hiring starts to pick up, and some of the vacancies that Steve articulated so well get filled? How do we fill them with the right thinkers and the right implementers so that we can get out of this?
Yeah, we can't allow uncertainty and impasse in government to mean you slow down with creativity in the private sector and elsewhere. So, use an uncertain opportunity to develop new ideas for new programs, new companies. If your students, now maybe is a great opportunity to take that idea that you've developed, while here at Carolina and, shop it around, if you will, because there will be open doors for you in government. There will be open doors for you in industry, but sometimes the sort of uncertainty has to be the time to try something out that might be a little risky or a little bit different. And that's where, look, the large companies like ours have to be willing to seek out young professionals.
Jeanne, additional perspective?
You know, I am an optimist, and so I'm hopeful for the future, and I've seen it in my own business journey and the current journey of Lexitas, of, you know, the work that we are doing. Heck, I mean, I'm having a great quarter from a revenue growth perspective, and so it's fantastic. And, you know, with growth creates opportunities, which is how I kind of started my comments here. So in a growing industry, in a growing economy, you know, that creates new jobs and new opportunities for people. So I am positive, and I think that the curriculum here at Carolina and other top-tier business schools prepare individuals appropriately. And I think these kind of conferences that take it maybe from the theory into the practical as well will support everyone in this room in their learning journey.
It's fantastic. And just want to let everybody know that I'd love to use maybe the last 5 minutes of the panel for questions from the audience if we can. So let me just go back to Steve for a minute. You know, Steve, you're at CMS, you're at FDA. Now, if you were to walk the halls there, you're going to see a lot of empty seats or different faces. Who do we need in those empty seats to make the next generation of FDA and CMS work better for the goals that are going to be the nation's priorities and the things that the people on this panel and in this room would like to see implemented?
Some of my comments were pretty dark. We're in a challenging time, but I also am an optimist, and I do believe that we're going to get to a better place. I think we're cutting back too much now. There were efficiencies to be had, but we could have had a much better, more productive conversation about that than we've had. As we get to a next stage, I agree with you fully that planning thoughtfully about what we should be building, the workforce that we need in the federal government and in industry is going to be really important. We can build to that, and at some point we will build back. We will bring in appropriate people, and it will allow us to better align the incoming workforce with the actual needs that we need today. Many of the people that are in CMS, for example, and we've lost a lot of people that are very dedicated, long-standing civil servants. They were there for 25 years, and there's advantages and disadvantages to that. The advantages are institutional knowledge, understanding of precedent. The disadvantages are continuing to do things the way you always have. So there's this opportunity to reshape, reframe, and grow in the future to the workforce that we really need to maintain our innovative edge.
So for the students in the room who may have scientific training and are looking to get into the business side, or military or teachers who are career switchers and looking at healthcare as an opportunity, what should they focus on while they're here at Keenan-Flagler? Anybody?
So I was thinking about this and the fact that I hire a lot of certified ophthalmic technicians, a lot of PhD ODs, so vision scientists, ophthalmologists, as well as nurses and physician assistants and physical therapists and personal trainers and people who understand the body. But I like it when they understand business as well. And so it's important for me, and so for those of you that are in a healthcare-related field, it's soak up the information on how companies generate strategies, execute on those strategies, and deliver returns from their shareholders. Because the biggest deficit sometimes that comes with a clinical individual is the inability to connect it to how money is made in a business. And that is something that's very important, for small, mid-size, even large companies.
Develop some depth in several different areas that are interchangeable and versatile. And I'll do a shout out, which gives me a great example of this. One of my former interns, Anderson Cohen, is up here today. And he is studied business as well as science, biology, great combination, but also, learned another skill that'll take him everywhere with a minor in French. That's the type of sort of cross-functional, cross-disciplinary training that enables you to be in a position where you can get a job in industry, you can get a job in government, various parts of the world. And I think if you do that, you don't have to major in all three like he's doing, but you can find a way to develop training that will take you down different routes because you don't know where your career is going to go. I mean, if you would have asked me 15 years ago if I would be sitting in the chair doing the thing that I'm doing now, I would not have been able to tell you that. So developing that versatility of thought and training, I think, is critical.
Any questions from the audience? We have about 2 minutes left. Yes, please, go ahead. It's a great question. The question is about how do you balance innovating with maintenance? And as somebody who loves the innovation part and hates the maintenance part, and anybody that I've worked with will tell you that, I do a crap job of it. So hopefully some of our other panelists can give some advice on that question. How do you balance the necessity and importance of innovating in your company with the essential maintenance functions that you have to carry out every day?
I do think a challenge that many companies face, and I've faced throughout my career, is trying to innovate too often. So making sure that the number of initiatives and projects that you have doesn't, quite frankly, require more than a note card to fill out. Because a lot of what you're trying to do is spend the time growing the business, and you can't do that if you're always ideating. And so I would say how I balance it, as much as I also like to be more in the blue ocean and all sorts of fun areas, is understanding and kind of thinking through it. Maybe, and I like to use my Fridays to spend a lot of time thinking through where the industry, how the week went, where the week needs to be, how the business is going, how the business needs to go. And but making sure that you keep your organization focused on the here and now is actually very important for you to be able to deliver on your annual goals.
And I think you were asking the question also on a personal perspective of how do you balance those parts of your job day to day. I don't think you do it all every day. There are going to be times, I look back at my year, and there were times where my team was being very proactive. We were generating new policy ideas, positioning those in the company and externally. And then there were months where we were having to be reactive to incoming fire that we were having to deal with. And I think that's okay. That's going to happen in business. And so keeping a broader view, though, of making sure you're always staying fresh with new ideas while at the same time having to deal with what's in front of you is a natural part of leadership and something that you develop the nuance for as time goes on.
Fantastic. Wonderful question. Thank you so much. We are out of time. I'd like to really thank Jeanne, Steve, and Andrew for being outstanding panelists. And now I'm going to turn it over to Erin to tell you about the rest of the run of the show. Thank you.